Hey everybody, welcome to the show. My name is Pablo Farnan and I hope that you're doing well. So you may be wondering why I have this camera right here. Well, because today I want to show you using this camera with this angle right here, some of the different settings that I use for my Gh5. And I want to preface this by saying that I'm mainly a vlogger, at least with these settings specifically. So I am a full-time filmmaker. I do video production as a full-time thing. So I am a filmmaker, I'm a content creator for other companies. So I do this stuff outside of just vlogging. But what's funny is that I use Gh5s for all my filmmaking stuff, for all my corporate stuff, and also for all my vlogging stuff as well. And so today I wanted to show you some of my settings, some of how I go about vlogging with the Gh5. So without further ado, let's get it going. So first things first, the thing you need to understand is that there is a ton of buttons on this thing. I mean, there's just so much going on, so much happening, so much possibility with the Gh5, both from a filmmaking standpoint and from a vlog standpoint. But specifically for my vlog, I have two forms of filmmaking that I do with my vlog. Obviously, there's very vlog style, which there's a lot of auto settings going on. There's a lot of like auto white balance going on. There's a lot of that kind of stuff happening from a vlog standpoint. But when I'm doing filmmaking stuff, which I do also do in my vlogs, I have segments of cinematic sequences that everything is manual, and I want to make sure I cover both of those today. So even if you're a vlogger or if you're a filmmaker or if you're both, this video should be helpful for you. So let's just start off with what's on the screen right when you turn it on here. The first thing I always double check is my exposure mode. If you can see that, I usually go between manual and aperture priority. Whenever I'm vlogging, like literally just talking to the camera like a vlogger, I have aperture priority. If it's nighttime and I'm vlogging, I sometimes use shutter priority, which is this S mode right here. So it really depends. If I'm vlogging, it's aperture priority. If I'm doing cinematic sequences where I'm doing like a ton of B-roll and stuff, then I'll do manual. For our picture profile up here in the left-hand corner, we have custom 4. So if you go into settings here, second camera on the left-hand side here, and you go down to photo style, custom 4, it's a natural profile that we use with a custom 4 setting. We like to get the most natural looking color out of camera. I know a lot of people are very into like S-Log and like getting this very grayscale looking thing that like after the fact you then color. I get it, I understand it. There's a lot of information that way. You can color grade how you want, I get that. But I like to personally get the most natural, beautiful looking product out of camera, like literally straight out of camera, so that I can just add a light LUT or a light grade and then really work with that. That's kind of more the way I do things, especially with vlogging. I like to just get the best looking thing and then I throw a LUT on top and I make modifications as needed. So that's kind of how I run with that, but this is what I do. A lot of people ask me picture profile. We have a natural picture profile, custom number 4 is what we have it on, and then this is the settings. We have -5 for contrast, we have 0 for sharpness, we keep that in the middle. Noise reduction is -4, saturation is -2, and hue is -1. So hopefully that's helpful. Now, if we move along here on the top, in the middle, we have 4K. We tend to shoot in 4K. That's kind of the way that we do things. I have shot certain things in 1080 just if it's like a long form thing where I'm holding my camera down and all that. But anything, the rule of thumb I have for vlogging is anything I do for vlogging, it can be 4K or 1080. We deliver everything in our company for both wedding filmmaking and also for commercial filming in 4K. So for vlogging, I tend to shoot in 24 frames per second for general vlogging style stuff. But what I do like to do, and this is where you'll see on the top of the camera here, I keep it here on manual, but we have C1, C2, and C3. Now for C1, that's where I usually keep my 60 frame setting on. So I literally create that as a custom thing where I can, anytime I'm shooting 24 frames here in manual, I can then switch to C1 and then I can actually get 60 frames right on the fly wherever I am, and it just modifies everything for me. So similar to 60 frames, I like to shoot 180 frames. The fact that this thing does that is insane. So what I'll do is normally I'll go from 24 frames here, I'll skip over 60 frames and I'll go straight to C2, which I have set for 180 frames. And that is just the most buttery, smooth, slow-mo ever. Now, next in line, I have this little hand here, which is stabilization. What I like to do with stabilization, the rule of thumb is that obviously the Gh5 has this thing called IS lock, which if you press this button, which is, I have it set for this button right here in the front of the camera, this little one right here, if you press that and then IS lock will then turn on. And that I use only for like some cinematic stuff in vlogging. I usually use it obviously for filmmaking, for commercial shoots and things like that. But when it comes to vlogging, I don't vlog with it on, because then you get this super weird like motion blur in the background that's trying to stabilize your like handheld stuff. It just doesn't work for vlogging. So I typically have that off. I keep it on this stabilizer, which is just a natural stabilizer for the camera, and it has more of a natural movement feel when you're actually holding your camera up with like a Gh5 or something like that. So stabilization is usually turned on. IS lock is only turned on for some cinematic sequence stuff. So for volume, I usually have this, right now I don't have a Rode mic on the top of this here, but I usually have a Rode mic like I do right on here on this camera, and usually I keep my volume to, depends on what I'm doing and where I am, but on the Rode mic itself, I'll usually keep things around 0 dB. If things are super loud, negative 10 dB, and then if things are, I want to capture something that's maybe far away or something that's kind of being whispered or something, I'll usually turn it to plus 20 dB, but that's very rare. Normally, for most vlogging situations, I'll keep it on 0 dB, and then on the camera itself, I'll usually go in between anywhere from like -5 to -10 dB on the camera, and I always am just checking my levels, which are usually right over here on the left-hand side. Again, I don't have the Rode mic on this camera right now, so you don't see that, but right here, there's usually levels that are bouncing, and I'm always double checking that that's bouncing between -6 and 0, because that's where I get the best sound. Now, again, when things are manual, I usually just make sure that I'm double checking my ISO, I'm double checking my exposure and my shutter, all those things. But when I do aperture priority, then that's when I usually am letting the camera do the work. So I will keep everything in auto, I will keep everything, and I'll just kind of mess with my wheel right here, and that will make things go a little bit darker and a little bit lighter, just depending on where I am. So I'm always double checking. Now the nice thing about Gh5 is that it does have a flip out screen, so I can see what I'm looking at. Obviously you don't want to look at the screen all the time while you're talking to the camera, because then it looks like you're not talking to the audience. But it's good to check, especially before you start rolling, just to see what it is you're looking at, kind of what your frame looks like, and then you can also double check just your exposure. And the nice thing about the auto setting is that with this wheel, you can just go up and down, and you can just fix last minute modifications before you hit record and before you start rolling. So that's pretty much what happens with the screen here. But as far as other settings and other buttons on the camera, I guess we can start with the top, I guess. I usually keep it, like I said here, this wheel usually stays on manual. That's where I usually just do most of my video, and again, I shoot in 24 frames. I go to C1 for 60 and I go to C2 for 180 frames. Everything changes accordingly. Now, another thing I do with the Gh5 is I do a lot of time lapses, so I like to double check that you know, that settings are all set up. So usually what I'll do is I'll go over here to manual mode right here, and then that will open up this setting. And so what I'll do is I'll usually hit over here, I'll go in and I'll look at the shooting interval. I don't know if you can see that, but I'll go to the shooting interval, I'll go in here and I'll usually put in the amount of seconds that I want the time lapse to be. The rule of thumb for me is like when it's people movement and I want like a nice 5 or 10 minute time lapse, like, you know, where I'll set the camera down for 5 to 10 minutes, then I'll usually do like 3 seconds. And then obviously depending on the amount of time that I have or that I want to set the camera down, I'll raise that number. But the other rule of thumb that I usually have is like if I'm doing like a cloud time lapse, I usually do it about like 10-second intervals. But it's something that you can mess with, but it's nice that the Gh5 does do time lapses. After I'm done with time lapses, I'll head back over to manual mode, and I'm making sure that I'm good back into video mode. So over here on the top side of the camera, you have a lot of things going on. You have a record button, I use both. I usually use just this one, the shutter one. Then I have this wheel, which depending on what you're doing with the camera, but like I said, for vlogging, I tend to use that just to go brighter to the right, darker to the left. Over here, the beautiful thing about Gh5 is you have a white balance button. Like, that's amazing. You don't have to go into a menu and then go to another menu and then find white balance. Like, white balance is on the camera, which is amazing. So you have a white balance button right here, literally says WB. Hit that, and there's 2 things that I do. So when I'm vlogging, I usually have it on auto, which is over here. I have auto white balance. And I kind of just double check my color before I hit record. I make sure that I look natural. I don't look too orange. I don't look too blue. I kind of make sure that I look natural. If I'm gonna do it like an extended sit down thing like this, I typically will do not auto, and I will go over to Kelvin 1, which is my custom white balance setting right here. And I like to do 2 things. I usually like to make sure that this is kind of centered up, this little grid here. It's amazing that you have this. And I kind of center that up first. Then I go back out, hit white balance again, and then I make sure that my Kelvin is set according to the room that I'm in. If you're in a warm room, obviously you want the Kelvin to be brought down. If you're in a white room or or a very like blue-ish room or whatever where it's not that warm, you obviously want to bring your Kelvin up, and you want to make the most natural possible product from what it is you're shooting. So that's usually what I do for like a sit-down vlog style thing. But if I'm walking around and I'm kind of just doing quick interactions and I'm doing quick movements and stuff, I don't have time to set all that up, especially if I want to get the shot and get the most natural feel from a vlog. So I typically keep everything on auto white balance for vlogging, except for sit-down stuff. And then again, for anything commercial wise or even wedding filmmaking wise, everything is manual. I always make sure that everything is done by me. So kind of a rule of thumb is when I'm in front of the camera, I tend to do auto white balance. If I'm behind the camera and I'm filming other people, it's all manual stuff. So I have control as a filmmaker. Next to the white balance button, I have the ISO button. So I like to hit that and make sure that I'm doing that as well. But again, when I'm doing like vlog style stuff and quick movement stuff, it's usually just auto. But then when I'm doing like actual sit down stuff or whatever, I'm checking that as well. So there's an ISO button. So right underneath that, there's an FN1 button. That's actually a customizable button, and that's right here. And so what I usually do with that, at least for us, is I hit FN1 and it opens up this teleconvert menu. And usually what I'll do is I can go back and forth from on to teleconvert and off from teleconvert. And all that really does is while I'm not recording, I'm able to punch in and punch out from the focal length that I have without losing quality. So it's actually pretty sweet that I'm able to do that. And I love using that for just different kinds of things. Like even with this is my vlog style lens and camera that I have right now, but it felt a little bit wide when I originally sat down. So this is actually punched in a little bit so that it's fitting me a little bit better in the frame. So this is something cool that there's an extra button for that. Now, if you go to the back of the camera here, I have an FN2 button right here. FN2 is my peaking. So I'm able to actually see what is in focus. So I love using that on the fly. I usually keep my peaking on just about all the time unless I want to really double check exposure and double check like my skin tone and what's in focus and that kind of stuff. But peaking is for focus. So I typically keep it on all the time. So while I'm vlogging, I can do a quick look over and I can see what's in focus just by seeing on the screen. Underneath that, I have an FN3 button. I don't typically use this for vlogging that much, but it's nice because I can actually see my my lumas and I can see what is actually, you know, overexposed or underexposed. So that's a nice feature right there. Down here I have FN4. This is a nice way to go back and forth from 60 frames also in 24 frames. You can see all your different recording qualities right in here. But again, I like having the shortcut, especially for vlogging, to go to C1 and C2 and then back to 24 frames again for all that. This is your menu. There's obviously a ton of stuff going on in here in the menu. This is your display button. So I don't really use that much, but this is basically the display. You can go between displays and see what you like on screen. Personally, I'm a filmmaker. I like to see everything that's happening all at once, so I keep everything on the screen whenever I'm filming. Over here on the other side, this is my playback button, so I can go in and I can see what was filmed before. As you can see, this was from an earlier podcast that we had going on. This is kind of a button that I'm always checking to see what I just last filmed, especially with vlogging. A lot of the time, I like to talk in different areas and go from one place to the other and kind of keep the conversation going. So it's nice to go back and obviously see what it was you were talking about before so that it's one cohesive thought, even though you may be switching locations. Also on the back here, we have this, which is you can actually switch from manual, which I usually keep it on, to autofocus, and then this other one, which I forget what it is. And this is the biggest thing that a lot of people ask me. They're always like, how do you have everything in focus? Because the Gh5 is not known for autofocus, which I know. It's not horrible, but it's not great either. So I keep everything on manual focus, and the way that I always do it is I literally do it how, you know, there's no trick or anything. I literally just check my focus every single time before I start recording, and I kind of have like a rule of thumb of how I do it. So on my lens, there's an infinity point where like that means that everything is in focus, and so that means that like just anything I point it at, it's in focus. And so that's kind of what I have there. As long as it's not too close to the camera, you're basically going to be in focus. So when I'm filming other people, I keep it on the infinity line, and then whenever I'm doing something that's like me or I'm closer to the camera like this, I double check my focus, and I actually have a little line cut out that I basically scratched out with an X-Acto knife. And anytime I hold the camera away from me with my Joby, that's how I know that I'm in focus. The same amount of distance that I'm gonna be away, I'll just double check that I'm on that line with my manual focus ring, double check that everything's good, I'll move it like that, and then I'll make sure that everything's good. Got my peaking ready to go, exposure's good, focus is good, hit record, and we'll get it going. So I think that is basically it, I think. The scary part about these kinds of videos is that you always forget, like you think you're gonna miss something. It's kind of a scare, like that's why I don't like doing these kinds of videos, because I feel like I'm gonna miss something. But honestly, that is essentially it for vlogging, and even for some filmmaking stuff. A lot of the principles are very similar, but I did want to go through this because I know a million people have been asking me, what are your settings for vlogging with the GH5? Because, you know, I've been having trouble, or I can't get things in focus or whatever, and so far it's been working out great for me. I just love the GH5. Again, I use it for all my commercial stuff, all my wedding filmmaking stuff, that I decided I'm gonna use it also for vlogging, because I used to use a Sony a6500. It was great, the autofocus was great, but the quality that I've been able to get out of the GH5 has been just insane, and I'm so happy that I made the switch. So those are all the settings. Hopefully the way I explained it, the way that I showed you made sense. If you have any questions at all, please let me know in the comment section below. You can DM me or message me on Instagram. I'll be more than happy to answer you. I'll send you a video of me answering. I've been loving to do that lately and connect with all of you. So again, thank you for all your questions, for all your time, for being here on the channel. I appreciate you. I hope that you're doing well. Like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube things, and I will definitely be seeing you very soon. See ya.